you know, Pastor Duane's out of town, so you're stuck with me. Well, we have a great story today as our gospel lesson, and for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to read it again, because if you're anything like me, sometimes you hear these historical texts and get a little caught up in the mythological elements of our faith story, or the orthodoxy that makes it hard to remember that the people in these stories were real people with families and jobs and hopes and dreams, and they existed just like you and I. So, as I read this again, let's all time warp together back into first century Israel, into the time of Jesus. Let your imaginations paint your own picture for this story. So here we are at the Sea of Galilee, a big lake, a freshwater, beautiful blue lake fed by springs and the Jordan River. In fact, it's where Jesus was baptized before this story today took place. Surrounded by palm trees, it's surrounded by beautiful flowering bushes, and there's small wooden boats scattered all around the coast. So with that picture in mind, let's hear this part of this reading again. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. So here we are, at the very, very beginning of the Jesus movement that we now call Christianity. Jesus is inviting his very first followers, who most likely are a group of folks who are probably pretty focused on just making enough to survive, making enough money to survive, and staying out of trouble with the Roman Empire who was occupying Israel at the time. This story is the beginning of a pretty radical movement led by Jesus. But where does it fit in the timeline of all the stories we've heard? This is the question I always ask myself. Where does this fall? Because we read them out of order. And so let's talk about what we know has happened already. We know that John the Baptist has emerged from the wilderness, dirty, wearing the skins of animals and eating locusts and wild honey. Probably the most eccentric character I can think of in the New Testament. Just a weird guy. We know that John the Baptist preached that someone greater than he was coming. And John the Baptist had himself gathered quite a following of disciples, including Andrew and John, who were two of the first disciples of Jesus who are in the story today. From this reading today, we know that John the Baptist had just been arrested by King Herod, who was essentially the governor of the state they lived in Galilee. And from the history that we know from the Bible, as well as various other historians, we know that the Jewish people at this time in Israel were waiting for the Messiah. There were various prophets that had been pointing to somebody else, including John now is pointing to somebody else is coming. The Messiah is coming. Somebody that they're expecting to save them from Roman occupation. They didn't know exactly what this person would be like, though. Maybe a new political figure, a king that would rule over an independent Hebrew nation. Or maybe perhaps a military figure, crushing King Herod and expelling the Romans from Israel. Certainly not this poor, clever son of a carpenter like Jesus, right? We also know that at this time, religious leaders, rabbis, we have pastors, the Hebrew people have rabbis, took on pupils or disciples, students, at a young age. In fact, almost every young Jewish boy in Israel at this time, and in some areas of the world still today this happens, they go to school to hopefully become a disciple of a rabbi eventually. In fact, by the time they turn 10 years old, so if you're in this room and you're around 10 or maybe a little older, imagine trying to learn the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Old Testament. That's called the Torah. I'm memorizing that by the time you're 10. You had to have it all up there in your head. That'd be tough. And if they were smart enough, they continued on this path of rigorous academics, trying to become a rabbi themselves. However, not everyone, in fact, most of those children were not good enough and not smart enough to become a rabbi. And they would be sent back home to take on a trade. Carpentry or shopkeeping, fishing, masonry, and that would really become the track they followed for the rest of their life. They were stuck in that. It was like a prison sentence. Really, that's all they had. So, now we know a little bit about the history of what's happened right here. So let's get into the meat of this. When I was in college, I went with a group of high school youth group friends from my home church to a cabin on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. It's about 30, 40 miles from where Pastor Duane is right now. We went there for a weekend. And so for those 3 days, we had a fire raging the whole time. We made awesome food on that fire. And just generally, we were taking a brief retreat from city life and from reading textbooks and writing papers and taking showers, things like that. On our final morning at that cabin, one of my closest friends and I woke up really early. We grabbed some fishing gear, we brewed some coffee, and we slid our canoe onto the glassy lake. It was one of those mornings where the fog was just sitting on the lake and you could swear you're going to break the lake when you put something in it. It's just perfect situation. And so we sat there in our canoe for 2 hours soaking our bait. Nothing was biting at all. In fact, we were looking down in the lake like, are there fish in this thing? Like, where are they? And we were starting to get really frustrated. And so we gave up for the morning. And we were hiding our bruised pride with statements like, oh, isn't the lake so nice today? Oh, isn't it nice to sit here and talk for so long? And given our Scandinavian complexion, we really should get out of the sun. Let's go. But as we were packing up and dumping the remains of our cold coffee into the lake, my friend said to me, you know, you don't really ever catch fish. I was offended at first, and then he continued. He said, they catch themselves. You dip your bait into the water, and eventually you'll set the hook to reel the fish in. But ultimately, the fish makes the decision to take what's being offered. He didn't know it at the time, and I didn't know it at the time, but he had just created a metaphor for evangelism in my book. For what it means to fish for people. So keep that story in mind. I'll get back to that later. In the context of this gospel lesson that we've heard today, Simon and Andrew had been going out about the trade as fishermen. They had just cast a net into the sea, hoping to make a big catch to sell. And as they involved themselves in their work, Jesus happened to pass by. And seizing upon the metaphor that was most appropriate for the situation, Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of people." They had been pursuing fish. Jesus said that they would cast their bait for people. A little ways down the path, they were walking, and he saw another set of brothers, James and John, with their father Zebedee and his hired employees. So I'm imagining this is probably a family business. They're out on the lake together fishing. And they're all in their boats, mending their nets, tying knots. And Jesus saw them and invited them to join with. So imagine that for a moment. They literally dropped the nets that they were tying down into the bottom of the boat, jumped into the lake, and hurried to shore to join this new rabbi who had invited them to become students again. Now, my first and immediate reaction when I hear this story usually goes something like, Simon, Andrew, James, John, you idiots, what are you doing? Leaving your jobs and your families and your homes and everything, your sense of security and your safety, your safe zone, to blindly follow this man who hasn't given you any sense of what you're getting into or any assurance that you'll have enough to eat or drink or have a roof over your head. You have no idea what you're getting into. This just seems a little silly. But knowing what we do know about the world they lived in, there's something much more to their decision to drop their nets and follow Jesus. This was an invitation by Jesus to start again, to try again to become a disciple of a rabbi, even though they've already been dismissed for not being smart enough and not being good enough. They've gone through that pain already. It's terrible, and now they have this new opportunity. It's like they've just drawn that Monopoly community chest card, get out jail free card. Yeah, you don't have to be fishers anymore. Come follow me. What an honor that would be. Just like Pastor Duane preached about last week, Jesus asked these first disciples to drop everything and follow him. Come and see what we can do together. Pitch your tent with me. Let's go fishing for people. See, the invitation given by Jesus wasn't to nobility on some VIP list. The 12 disciples, they weren't his board of chairs. They weren't his knights of the round table. They were ordinary people who were eager to follow wherever he led them. Because in Jesus there was a prospect of new life and a new beginning, a fresh start. I believe that we're all given the same offer. Drop your nets. Come and see. Start over with me. Get out of jail. And I believe also that there's a discussion to be had about what the nets are in our life, those things that prevent us from really following Jesus. Usually this is where the conversation goes, for me at least, when I'm talking about this lesson, is what are the things that get in the way? So is it jobs, or is it family, or a sense of security and safety in what your life has already given you? Or is it not wanting to stick your neck out in the world that's pretty eager to bash your head in for saying or believing or doing something that isn't considered normal, or maybe it's considered a little weird? But more than anything, I believe that the offer we're given to follow Jesus and become fishers of people is just as much the invitation to live a life of integrity as anything else. Did you notice that when Jesus hollers out to James and John to follow him, they didn't respond with, yeah, hold on, we just have a few more knots to tie here. We'll get right back to you. No, they didn't do that. They dropped what they were doing. They jumped out of the boat and hurried to shore. Simon and Andrew, they didn't say, well, we've got tickets to this great concert on Friday. Can we join you on Saturday? No, of course not. This Jesus movement is not an experience of convenience, of ease, or of safety. Jesus calls us to make a fundamental shift in the way we think and the way we act. He calls us to no longer work solely on our own behalf, but work together and for each other. To be a follower isn't to just show up and be a part of the scenery. It's to have the integrity to do the right thing when nobody's watching. We don't follow Jesus on Sunday, then pick up our nets again at school or work on Monday. Hopefully. I mean, I do, but I think we all fall short. And to be a follower is to dive headfirst into messy, tangled relationships with God and with each other, and to share in our experiences together. It's to get dirty in the world, not just saying, doing, and thinking what is safe or comfortable or what you think other people want you to say, do, or think. Just look around at the world we live in right now. I think of a number of nonprofit organizations who in 2004, Hurricane Katrina, they showed up to New Orleans and conveniently placed their trucks with their big logos on the side in front of cameras for a photo op, but did nothing to help people. Or even locally, think of some of our public servants and elected officials. They show up to community events, even here at our church, like Thanksgiving blessing, Christmas blessing. Never put on a pair of gloves, or hand out a turkey, or greet somebody in need. I'm sure many of you, like myself, have struggled to understand and practice forgiveness and grace to others, even though every week we pray here at church, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Live with integrity. Come and see what we can do. Drop your nets. Follow me, we're fishing for men. So remember that metaphor for evangelism that I heard from my friend when I was not catching fish in the canoe? I can't help but wonder if that helps explain this idea of following Jesus to become fishers of people. What does the act of making Jesus' teachings our priority say about our ability to invite others into this journey of faith? If we're joyfully willing to abandon our boats and seek other seas with him, to live abundantly with each other in this beautiful creation that we've been given, won't others be curious about our passions? I have to believe that accepting the invitation we have in Jesus, living a life of integrity and abundance, pitching a tent with each other, it's like a living net. It's a bait that we can throw out into the world and grab a hold of ourselves when we really need to be pulled back in. Nobody can force us to believe anything. And in the same way, we can't force our beliefs on anybody else. Not every fish will find its way into the nets of the gospel. But we can extend the invitation we're given. Because after all, if you don't dip your net in, the fish don't have an opportunity to make that choice, right? So in a few moments, we're going to be singing the hymn, "You Have Come Down to the Lakeshore." It's a really great hymn. It meets us right where we're at, caught up and tangled in our own nets. But before we sing it, I'd like to offer up the first verses of prayer. So please join me in praying. Dear Lord, you have come down to the lakeshore, seeking neither the wise nor the wealthy, but only asking for us to follow. Sweet Lord, you've looked into our eyes, kindly smiling, you've called out our names. On the sand, we've abandoned our small boats. Now with you, we will seek other seas. Amen. I will invite you to open your red hymnal to hymn 817, "You Have Come Down to the Lakeshore." And here's a reminder that in addition to sing loudly, is a net you can drop right now.